All right, guys, good morning. Welcome back, everyone. We've got just 2 minutes, basically, until we start. But thank you, as usual, for your arrival to the meeting, and I'll be right with you guys in just a few. Feel free to say hi or anything else you want in that chat. Hi there. Caleb, Delilah, Fernando, John. Good to see you guys. Monica, Brianna, AJ, Kayla. How's it going? Good to see everybody. Sky. Yelka, Ashley, Nicole, Veronica. Hey, everybody. Okay. Great. Good to see all you guys. Cam, Roxana, Angel, Andres, Jonathan. Welcome back, guys. Okay, so it's 8:30, so I'm just going to get us slowly underway here. Hope you guys had a nice spring break. Obviously, at the last meeting, well, I guess it wasn't a meeting. You guys took a quiz on Tuesday, so thank you guys for preparing and performing on that quiz. I'm working through grading it. And I'll be able to finish that pretty fast and give you guys the answer key for that quiz so that you can compare it to your own answers and see how you did. And if you wanted any more further detail on it, you could easily just check in with me. So cool, we're done with that. First half of the class is behind us. If anyone's ever curious about any of the scores they've achieved so far in the class, as you know, I've invited you to just check in with me at any time for a grade check. Most of those that are curious have done so, and I've answered all emails, and my policy is always to get back to messages within 2 days if I can. I usually always can. So 2 days is the window max to get a response back for any kind of grade request. But we've talked about fallacies, we've talked about language, we've talked about the concept of knowledge, and some famous social psychology experiments, qualities of a good critical thinker, basic aspects of logic, what is deduction and induction, what is a valid argument or a sound argument or an inductively strong argument, what are modus ponens and modus tollens, and all kinds of interesting topics that we've covered to this point. Well, for now, we're going to have a couple of little meetings on the topic of the media and the internet and how to be digitally literate in this world. So basically, we have a couple meetings that go over the topic of media and how to critically analyze messages and information that you find in the media, whether that's from like journalism and news, whether that's stuff that you see or read on social media, maybe podcasts, etc., that you might be listening to. How can we distinguish between reliable and unreliable information, true and false claims? And so we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. The next homework assignment that will be given is going to have to do with finding examples of fallacies in advertising and marketing materials. So I'll get us started on the topic of media today and then next Tuesday, and then I'll be able to give you guys that assignment. But we're going to hold on for a little while to develop this chapter and a couple of chapters before we get into that. So yeah, I hope you guys did have a nice spring break. I know this is the first time we've been back at the live stream since we broke away for the holiday. I'm now totally vaccinated. That's a little update I can tell you. I guess I've had my second dose last Saturday, so I'm pretty much good to go now, and don't have to worry about dying from the coronavirus or going to the hospital, which is nice. So I know that the vaccine rollout is gaining speed and gaining momentum. I certainly encourage everybody when they're eligible, whenever they can, to get vaccinated ASAP so we can all get back to normal sooner than later. But I think it's going pretty well, at least for now. So guys, and yeah, I didn't really have any kind of major side effects or anything really, just a little fatigued for maybe 24 hours, but that was about it. Now back to normal, 100%. So cool, let's do this. Today's meeting, I'm going to talk to you guys about the material in chapter 11, and then we'll go over stuff that's in chapter 10 on the Tuesday meeting after the weekend. I know that in the syllabus it says 10 today, 11 the next week, but actually looking at the topics, I think that the book itself is kind of out of order because it's a little more primary information in chapter 11 and then going back to chapter 10. But either way, if you read it all, you'll get all the same content by the time we're done. Let me just check really quick. Is everything good? You can hear me and see me. The live stream's fine. Just double checking with you guys, making sure that everything's cool before I start giving a little bit of a lecture. Yeah? Just let me know. I'm running the stream also on my phone, so I think I can tell that there's no interruptions, but just like to periodically check in. Okay, perfect. So the lecture today is not going to have like a ton of detailed notes like we sometimes have. You know, like I'll put a bunch of vocabulary items up there, and you know, you're responsible for knowing all those different concepts. It's a little bit more conversational and breezy lecture, so I'm talking through a lot of it without creating a ton of, you know, itemized notes up here. But a lot of what we are doing in this meeting is going to be helpful for that third homework assignment that I mentioned. So, so just try to take it in, and we'll see how much time it takes. Okay, so mass media. Mass media and the internet. Okay, so good critical thinking skills require that we are able to analyze information that we get from media sources. We want to look at the history of mass media in the United States and in the West, which we will do. We'll learn a little bit about how much media advertisers and mass media broadcasters depend on advertising dollars and revenue to support their programming. We will try to develop skills for critically evaluating news reports. We'll examine the influence of the government on media reports, the impact of the internet, and how to analyze imagery and visuals that we see within the media. So we take in so much media every day in this country and really around the world, but you might be surprised to know how much time do you think the average American spends doing something having to do with media. Now, media I'm construing very broadly, just as the book does. So that encompasses television, internet, smartphone, and then traditional print media like newspaper, magazines. How many hours a day do you think the average American spends looking at a screen? Do you have any guess about that? Because this is it's kind of in a way, I mean, it's like a surprising statistic, but then it's also sort of not surprising when you just think about how much time we do spend preoccupied with our social media feeds. I mean, even right now you're using media. You know, you're using YouTube Live as a media source to take in your classes in school. So you're claiming 7 hours, Violetta. Nicole, you're saying 6 hours. Well, it's even more than that. How crazy is that? So it says right here, first page of chapter 11, we live in an information age in which we are bombarded daily with an overwhelming amount of data. The average American spends about 9 hours a day watching television, surfing the internet, using their smartphone, reading the newspaper and magazines, or using some other form of media. So yeah, we're really like drowning in media. We're using media so much. And this was a book, of course, that was published pre-pandemic. This is it is the 2021 edition, but pandemic wasn't full swing until like, you know, mid-2020. And there's already 4 editions before this current edition of the book. So they're using a lot of this previous topics and writing from the other former previous editions. So like when they say 9 hours, that's a pre-pandemic statistic. And that's also what's shown in the 4th edition of the book from 2017. So now that we're all on lockdown and, you know, we can't even really go out and congregate in the real world, I would say that this number has probably gone up even more. But of course, we would need to perform a statistical analysis to confirm that. But even before the pandemic, 9 hours a day. So it obviously has a huge influence on your thinking, on your habits, on your judgments, when you're daily exposed to that much media and you have that much of a media diet and a media consumption. So we take in so much every day. That means that we should be aware of its influence on us and carefully evaluate it so that we maintain independence, autonomy, and control over our own belief systems and judgments. Now, let's talk about the rise of the mass media. Before television kind of became a staple of the American household, that's back in the 1940s after World War II. Prior to that, it was radio and magazines and such that were the main forms of mass media. Now, what exactly is mass media? There's a very broad definition of it given in the book, so I'll put it here. Mass media, it's a form of communication that is intended to reach or to influence a large national or international audience. Okay, mass media, trying to reach the biggest possible audience. Oh, not to worry, Gabriel, good to see you here. It's all good. I know how it goes sometimes with the internet. To be contrasted against mass media, we also have niche media. So that's mentioned in the book. Let me put it here. Hopefully I can fit it. Niche media. That is a form of communication, but it's geared towards a narrower targeted audience. So this is media that is focused on, geared towards a narrower target audience. Okay, so mass media. Think of like the big national and international broadcasting companies. If it's like CNN or NBC, CBS, this is not tailored towards one specific demographic. It's for the whole nation and the wide scale of demographic backgrounds, age groups. So it's broadcast to the public at large, and it's not trying to tailor the content towards a specific type of person. But niche media does do that. So, like music, television, MTV, that's just for people that are interested in, like, I don't know, something having to do with the music industry, even though their menu of programming content has kind of expanded a little bit beyond that. But then you have sports channels, right, that are just for the sports enthusiast, ESPN. And that's just talking about television, but there's also, of course, websites and such that are designed for people with specific interests. If you subscribe to like a magazine or something, obviously a lot of them are going to be tailored to specific interests and hobbies. It's like guns and ammo is for the firearms enthusiast, cars and automotive for the automobile enthusiast. So these are niche forms of media. They're not for like every possible person, but people with specific interests or perhaps specific demographics. Homes and gardening, for like the classical stereotypical homemaker type. I don't know, there used to be Spike TV that was geared towards the more stereotypically masculine, heteronormative male. And then I think you had like, what's Oprah's network? I forget what it's called, but anyway, like if you're a fan of Oprah, and it's also kind of a bit more stereotypically feminine. There's also Lifetime channel. So anyways, understand that there's the big national and international broadcasters that are not trying to skew towards a particular subset of people, and then you have niche media. Niche media has obviously grown in scale and size over the generation since the early era of radio and television, because back then in the beginning, there were just a couple of major broadcast stations. So by the year 1930, about half of United States homes had a radio. And in the 30s and 40s, a few radio networks did all the news and entertainment. So there weren't this like grand menu of media options for consumers to choose from back then. Today, if it was television, you know, there's like 1,000 channels. If you wanted to go on to the internet, there's like a million different subtopics that you could possibly go down the rabbit hole and pursue if that was your interest. But think of the world of media as it existed in the earlier portions of the 20th century before the advent of television. There were just a couple of major media sources. There were just a couple of major mass media broadcasters. If you wanted back then, before the era of television, to take in visual news, like how we would watch the news on TV or on the internet, you'd actually have to go to the movie theater. They would show each week newsreels at the movie theater. So if you wanted that experience, then it would be like a communal experience. You're going to the theater with a bunch of other members of the public, watching the news on the newsreel at the theater. After World War II, we started to have more televisions seep into American households. And for like the first generation of television, there were only 3 stations. Does anybody know what the big 3 stations were that initially started off? You had 3 channels to choose from. These 3 channels still exist. They're some of the basic channels that you don't need cable to have. What do you think are these 3? If anybody knows, maybe some of you know, or maybe you could even guess. I bet you'd be able to guess if you tried. What do you think? The big 3? ABC, CBS, NBC. That's correct. So these were the original 3 stations: ABC, NBC, and CBS. So American Broadcasting Corporation, National Broadcasting Corporation, and CBS. Those were the 3. But obviously, since then, media has had a larger and larger influence, and it's spawned ever so many different, subcategories of media content. Yeah, so Channel 4, I think, is NBC, so that's basically correct, Roxana. I was just thinking of the name. But yeah, NBC is Channel 4, CBS, I believe, is 5, and then ABC is Channel 2. Well, anyway, those are the 3, and now we have a lot more. Some people are worried, and I think for decently valid reasons, that the growing influence of mass media over our daily lives is something that we might have some concerns over, because it's basically taken away the role that traditional family and educational institutions used to have in shaping your perspectives and worldview. So kids growing up today, you could argue a lot of times are being raised by media. They have so much time alone to spend watching TV, the internet, that they can learn all kinds of stuff that their parents aren't teaching them or that their schools aren't teaching them. And in some cases, lessons and ideas that are running counter to mainstream and widely available information, and sometimes even scientific information. So that's not something that would have happened in a world where you only have 3 media sources to choose from. Now a person can basically, with the kind of confirmation bias that people have, wall themselves off in a world of media information that simply reinforces whatever worldview they may happen to have. So, there are people who can build communities of like-minded affinity around almost anything, whether that's like racism or, hobbies that people have or gaming. So it creates a possible world where there's much less unity around the sources of information that we have. And so we're not all on the same page as much. That's hugely concerning, because if we don't have a shared set of facts, then people aren't operating off of the same assumptions. And yeah, Gabriel, we'll talk about corporate ownership and consolidation of the media. That's another big concern. More and more major companies are taking control of a greater and greater share of the media footprint that's out there. And so you might be concerned about the content, the quality, the objectivity of media messages if there's just a few big corporate overlords running the whole system. But here's what it says in the book on that, so you can hear it from the book. It says, by 1930, half of all American homes had a radio. In the 30s and 40s, a few large national radio networks broadcast news and entertainment to the whole country. Large circulation magazines such as Life and the Saturday Evening Post kept the public informed. For visual news, people relied on the weekly newsreels shown in movie theaters. Even after TV made its appearance soon after World War II, for many years there were only 3 commercial stations: ABC, CBS, and NBC. Now, the increasing presence of mass media in our culture has changed our lives. Since the 1950s, more and more of our experiences have been shaped by the corporations that control the media, rather than by family and educational institutions on which past generations relied. On the other hand, without these mass media corporations, we would not have the free or relatively inexpensive access to entertainment and information that we do now enjoy. So there's kind of like, you know, a dark side and a light side to this. There's kind of like a mixed bag. On the one hand, there's the potential for people to have less consensus around the issues because, I mean, if you were living in the time of your grandparents, you wouldn't be able to like Google something and find a friendly answer for whatever information you were seeking. You would have to go to the library or ask a teacher or ask someone who's got authoritative expertise. So there is that issue. But on the other hand, the value and the benefit of it is that obviously we're living in a world where we have information right at our fingertips. So if we were just good critical thinkers and we could judiciously chart our course as kind of like the captain that takes in the information and divides it from that which is unreliable, then we would have so much more advanced tools at our handy disposal to make use of than our parents, grandparents, and beyond ever had. So we have access to much more media and information than prior generations had, but we have to know how to use it. Otherwise, we can just get lost in the weeds trying to distinguish true from falsehood. Okay, so media today. Today, cable news, smartphones, the internet are giving us far greater media choices. Audiences are more specialized. We have a lot of these niche specialty networks, websites. People also seem to increasingly select media on the basis of their political preference or ideology. And as I was kind of indicating just now, that's another concern. If you have groups of people who do not agree on fundamental facts, like who won an election or what is the agenda of members of Congress or whatever, or what is the fact about whether or not I don't know, a particular event happened, or whether or not a policy is sound or not. If we can't have some kind of consensus around these issues, then it promotes political disunity, and that can tear at the fabric of society over time. With confirmation bias, as you guys know, people sometimes don't want to seek out information that is contrary to their established views and worldviews. So with the media landscape that we have, it offers people the opportunity to basically have a bubble of information which insulates them from other views. And of course, again, as I'm saying, that wouldn't necessarily be the case in a world where there wasn't such social media and internet access to a completely diverse set of facts that other people don't agree on. We also see a disturbing trend of media consolidation by a few corporations. And that, I think, is what you were talking about there just a little while ago, Gabriel. Yeah, so in the 80s, in the early 80s, there were like 50 different companies that controlled much of the market share of the media world. But by 2014, much more recently, the past decade, it's been reduced to just a handful that are controlling all of these different media outlets. So here's what we see in the book. At the same time that news media options are proliferating, getting more options, a select few large corporations are controlling more and more of it. In 1983, 50 corporations controlled the majority of news media in the United States. But by 2014, the media was controlled by just 6 companies, which include Time Warner, Disney, Murdoch's News Corp, that's what owns Fox and all of that, Bertelsmann of Germany, Viacom, and General Electric, which owns NBC. So you might worry that when there's fewer stakeholders in the media world, that there's less room for honest competition between news sources. You might also worry about the possibility of censorship for stories that run contrary to the profit motivation of these companies. Because after all, corporations have to make a profit, and one way that the media-based corporations or companies make profit is by selling advertising revenue to keep their programming on the air. So like, in television, for example, when you see commercials, why are they there? Well, it's because the vendor that wants to advertise their product pays the broadcaster in order to secure the airtime to display that media message on the airwaves during their programming. And that, of course, funds the programming and operations of the broadcaster. So they want to have advertising revenue coming in. And this becomes a kind of business relationship between the broadcasting company and the vendor of the product or service that's being advertised on their shows. But think about it, right? If you have these needs for advertising revenue, are you really going to allow your media um, commentators and so on to say things that are critical of the profit motivation of those companies. So like if Coca-Cola, for example, is running a lot of big ads during your intermissions on your shows, and you're taking a kickback from them in order to allow them to show those commercials, are you really going to have your newscasters run that hard-hitting expose on the dangers of like the big soft drink lobby and maybe how that's fueling an obesity epidemic and some of our young people? You might not want to run that story because it's not going to be helpful to Coca-Cola, who you're relying on for advertising revenue. I'm just making one example here, but that principle can be seen across the board, where you shield your corporate sponsors from accountability, and therefore that might be something that you, as the consumer of media information and products, worry about. Are we having information that's sometimes censored or edited in a way in order to prevent us from making different consumer decisions? Now, another interesting point to know is that so in the year 2000, right around 21 years ago, turn of the century, newspaper, magazines, and television were at peak levels of like consumer market share. So like most ever people buying those magazines, watching television was around the year 2000, but it's steeply declined since then by over 30%. What do you think would be your guess? What could be the possible explanation for why the influence of newspaper, magazine, and television has declined 30% since the peak levels that we saw right around the year 2000? What could possibly have happened between 2000 and now to have driven, traditional print media and television off of center stage? What do you think would be that change? Anybody has a guess? I think it's yes, that's correct. Yes, it's the internet. It's the rise of the internet and social media. So with the rise of the internet and social media, it kind of detracts from the need in some cases for such traditional forms of journalism, because a lot of us can now just use crowdsourced reports that we find on like social media to find information about a breaking story. So like, if there was a shooting happening or something, you might go and put on CNN or your local news channel to see facts about it. But if you go on Twitter, a lot of times you're going to have a lot of people that are present at the scene that are tweeting like, wow, this guy's shooting and we're hiding in a closet. And crowdsourced reporting, reporting and stuff from people that are actually there can sometimes be faster and more tied to the events than traditional forms of journalism, where you have a news crew show up with a van and they start interviewing people and trying to assess the facts at the scene. It also eliminates some of the labor costs that these media corporations would have had to have before by hiring all these journalists and reporters. So now that can kind of be outsourced in a way to the public who are just posting things. There's also this trend away from hard news and towards more lifestyle, entertainment, and gossip, which is kind of sad, right, in a way. I mean, we have these amazing tools to retrieve information, the internet, right there at our fingertips. If there's anything you want to know, you're only a few clicks away, I guess. But the thing is, as much as we have access to way more media and choices, we're not necessarily using that access in a way that's leading to any kind of intellectually satisfying result, because a lot of us are just watching like entertainment, sports. Sometimes we're talking about celebrity gossip, who's making up, who's breaking up. And that consumes a lot of our time and attention when we go out and observe media. So even though there's more news access and more news sources today, some studies indicate that people are not generally more well-informed. So isn't that kind of sad? I mean, we have the ability to be so much more well-informed than any prior generation, but maybe we get easily distracted by the overwhelming deluge of options that we're faced with. And so that's something for critical thinkers to try and just do their best at, to make the best possible use of this great technology and access to info that we all have now. But look, I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to paint a bleak picture of the role of media as though I'm just saying, hey, media is a dangerous and, kind of thing that you should treat with skepticism and find your own truth. I'm not saying that really. I mean, sure, there's room for criticism, but at the same time, when journalists do their job well and professionally, they can expose very important scandals, whether those are corporate or government scandals, and we, the people, owe a debt of gratitude to having a free press. If we lived in a country where there wasn't a free and independent press, or a press that could be just shut down by the state, then we would all be way worse off. So it's something that we should value and honor, but we have to hold the media accountable too. As it says here in the book, the media and news have played a key role in exposing corporate and government scandals. For example, the expose of John Rockefeller and his oil monopoly by journalist Ida Tarbell resulted in a federal investigation and Supreme Court breakup of Standard Oil in 1911, so breaking up the oil monopoly. And one other example that they give is in the early 70s, Woodward and Bernstein, Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post, were instrumental in exposing the Watergate scandal, which led to the resignation of President Nixon. Woodward and Bernstein, great journalists, still alive, but they were pretty young back then. And so it just shows you that there can be major changes, social upheaval, change of policy, change of leadership even, due to the effective and enterprising work of journalists when they do their job well. But, you know, keep in the balance of your own judgment, the liability that people have to make errors. Sometimes news reports can be formed in haste. Sometimes, especially when there's breaking news, everyone wants to be the first to report on a scoop. And sometimes the rush to be the first one to hit the newsstand with the topic can cause inaccuracy in reporting. So we always want to cross-check against media reports with other available information. It also talks there in the chapter about the internet. So what about the internet? In the 1990s, the internet really kind of started. I'm old enough to remember the early days of the internet, but it wasn't so amazing back then, really. It was kind of cool just to be able to like chat with people from wherever. I remember back in the days of America Online, AOL Messenger, you know, people would talk and chat, and it was kind of cool that we had this new form of communication. But if you were just browsing websites and stuff, it could be a little frustrating at times because we were on old dial-up internet systems, like 20 kilobits per minute or something, and it would take forever for it to load, like even a very simple graphic on the screen. But you got to start somewhere, and that's how the internet began. And as you guys know, in our current generation, it's been growing by leaps and bounds. So the use of the internet has more than tripled since the year 2000. Let me get this information here in the book. Switch to this page. Yeah, as it says here, 90s was the first decade of the internet, and use has tripled more than over 3 times since the year 2000. As of November 2015, more than 3 billion people worldwide are using the internet. 88% of North Americans, 74% of Europeans, 40% of Asians, 29% of Africans, and 52% of people living in the Middle East, with the most rapid growth in internet use occurring in Africa and the Middle East. As of January 2016, almost half of the world population uses the internet. So there's billions of people online, and therefore it's a very important fact about our daily life. I mean, for example, right now we're on the internet just taking in this lecture. So imagine being in a pandemic like back in the Spanish flu time in the early 20th century with no internet. I mean, we would not only be socially distancing, but we couldn't even, you know, hold Zoom meetings and stuff. So certainly it's given us a lot of value, but we also want to carefully influence its impact on our daily life. If we spend this much time using it all the time, let's try to be critical about what influence it may have on us and how to use it in a way that's productive and helpful. And you know, there are some statistics given here about the relative rates of internet users in different countries. In the United States, it's up there around 90%. And you may think, wow, that's a surprise. I would have thought it's almost 100%. But there is a digital divide. There are like very poor areas and like rural areas where there's not very good broadband access and where there's not enough wealth to own like really fast devices or even maybe any at all. So we hope to bridge that digital divide more and more to bring internet access and good data speeds to those that are the less fortunate. I think that's one of the elements of Biden's so-called infrastructure plan, to try and develop greater broadband access to rural parts of the country. And internationally, that's a goal for global leaders as well. In the poorer countries is where we see the least access to the internet, which kind of intensifies the digital divide and the haves and the have-nots. When people don't have the internet, they also don't have access to information and facts, which makes them less equipped to govern themselves. So So that's certainly a goal as we continue through the 21st century to try and get better and quicker internet access for all people, including the poor. So how many high school seniors spend, or how much time do high school seniors spend on the internet? Well, it shows, according to some statistics and data that's been collected, that currently a lot of high school seniors, most all, spend more time on social media than studying. Of course, there's an argument there that that can have an adverse effect on your grades. Of course, everyone thinks they're the exception to the rule. I mean, you all know how much you're using the internet, but everyone of themselves thinks, well, I can handle it and balance it out. But you know, sometimes it's okay to log off and to kind of decompress a little bit, to take some time away from social media or the internet to focus on your studies. But you'll balance that out in the best way possible. It's just notable in the book that there's a lot more use of the internet and kind of just for fun and games than studying in a lot of cases. It gives us access to so many different tools. We can do almost anything online nowadays, right? You can seek jobs, you can apply for schools, you can attend classes, you can make friends, you can almost live like a whole virtual life in some of these gaming platforms too. So because it's replaced a lot of the things that we used to only be able to do in real life, it has the potential to take on more and more of our time, more and more of our energy and focus. So we need to be able to carefully monitor its impact on us and think about what we see, hear, and even post on the internet. Facebook has billions of users. I wonder what percentage of college freshmen you think use some type of social media site. It's in the high 90s. It's upwards of 94%, so that might not be a surprise to you. You may be surprised that it's not 100%, but it's definitely close. And over 25% of college freshmen are using these social media sites more than 6 hours a week. So a lot of time gets spent just checking your feeds, looking at your notifications, replying to messages, doing group chats. The textbook mentions that one should be somewhat careful about the content that they post. I know a lot of times if people post more controversial or racy type of content, then they might use a fake account or with a fake name. But whether you're doing that or not, just be careful, because obviously you want to consider not just the intended audience, but the unintended audience. Sometimes you could have authority figures, parents, teachers, employers that try to view your social media feeds. And I think there's a saying that there's always a tweet, right? So you want to be at least somewhat careful as you manage your social media habits. But at the same time, as I'm saying that, this is maybe me riffing on my own, but I know that we have freedom of speech, and I think that's an important value. In a way, it's kind of a double standard, isn't it? That there are sometimes very prominent figures, sometimes very powerful figures, that may use the internet in a way that deviates from what we are told to do in our everyday lives as just normal citizens. But as sad as it is to say, there are two standards. So you're not going to be able to get away with some of the bombastic statements that you see public figures making in some cases. So just keep that in mind. It's not necessarily wise to say something that can later on be used against you for whatever reason. But at the same time, you have freedom of speech and you'll make the right choice, I'm sure. So some also argue that the internet is an equalizer. I've heard the phrase that it's the great equalizer, and the book uses this phrase as well. And why does that statement made? Because it kind of makes us all equal in the sense that we all have the same access to information, and we can all participate in the conversation of like democracy and public debate. It's not like it's only some people who can log onto the internet and you know, search for whatever information they want, and not others. So it kind of makes us all equal in that sense, and that has facilitated movement towards democratic reform in a lot of countries that were held under the rule of dictators and autocrats. So like in the Arab Spring, for example, a lot of countries in the Middle East which saw revolutionary movements that overthrew long-standing dictators in the past 10 years or so. A lot of those movements were assisted by the ability that people had to organize and discuss topics online. So, you know, you can create a Facebook group or create an event there where you're now trying to promote people all going out and protesting against some kind of overreach of the government or some kind of injustice. And therefore, you know, the internet has also promulgated greater basis for political protests, civil disobedience, and organizing efforts. So that's another value and benefit that it has, and I'm sure you guys are also familiar with that. Be careful, though, that as you're on the internet, you do some work to try and fact check information that you find from whatever source, because obviously false claims can easily proliferate online. It's easy for people to design websites that have the same kind of professional look as maybe a more mainstream professional journalistic enterprise. So you have to be able to double check, go to Snopes, go to other available fact checkers, Washington Post, see how many Pinocchios are on the claims and stuff like that, because you don't want to just be the sort of naive, unwitting person that takes everything as a given, especially because people have easy access to the internet and they can promote false claims just as easily as you can access them. There's some mention in the book about online universities. Basically, the message is beware. A lot of those online universities, they offer cheap courses and they promise you like prospects for easy study that'll lead you towards your career goals. But many of those institutions are for-profit colleges that don't necessarily have the same kind of credentialing or academic reputation when you do finish. I've known people that have actually made big mistakes going to like certain universities, attaining a degree, and then not being able to do anything with it because it's rejected in the professional world as having any kind of value or status, since it comes from whatever Walden University or something. Well, anyway, you guys don't have too much to worry about. You're already students here at Cal State Fullerton. I know we're online right now, but this is still a brick and mortar institution with a stellar reputation. There's mention in the book about how much people use the internet to view pornographic images and videos. And it's, in a way, I don't know, is it surprising or is it not surprising that pornography is as much as 30% of all web traffic online? So there's a lot of people then spending time going to these types of websites and looking at that stuff. And of course, if you're an adult, you're free to do that if you wish, but just know that if you're doing it in the wrong setting, like at the workplace or school, that could be something that's held against you or even penalized. And if you care for children and you have custody over them or you're responsible for them, you would want to maybe monitor their internet usage, because it's very easy for anybody to access the same websites. There's not really like too many screens or controls that prevent people from easily doing that. There are some applications and things that can be used, I guess, to help support editing a child's access to media and internet websites. So those that deal with children may consider that as well. It says here that many college students consider using the internet at some point to try and turn in a plagiarized assignment, submitting work that you didn't create from another source to try and pass the assignment without having to know much about it. That's obviously wrong. Clearly that's wrong. I mean, I'm a professor, so I'll tell you straight up, that's definitely disrespectful, and we don't like it when people do that. It's deceptive. It shows disrespect for the class and the topics. It shows that you really just want to get the results, but you don't want the knowledge. So anyway, do yourself a favor and get the most out of your education. If you try to bypass the lessons and just get to the results, you're not actually getting the most out of your education, and I guarantee you that you're good enough and smart enough to do it on your own. So don't worry about that. Well, just a couple more terms then as we cap off this part of Chapter 11. There's discussion of the term media literacy. Sometimes they call it digital literacy, but I prefer the more broad label because media can be encountered in all forms. And the definition of it is pretty simple. It's just the ability to understand and critically analyze the influence of media. Okay, so media literacy is increasingly important in this modern day that we are in, because it might not have been so important if we were living in a prior time, like in your grandparents' time, when there's only just a few media sources anyway. If there's only a few, then information is pretty centralized, and therefore it's going to be basically vetted and controlled for its accuracy and content. But when you have like a million different media options to choose from, you're basically going to have to steer your course and chart a course through that labyrinth of options. And you're going to have to make distinctions between credible and false information, reliable from unreliable claims, truth from sensationalism, and all of that sort of thing. It wasn't as hard, I guess, for our ancestors and such going back, our grandparents and furthermore, because they wouldn't have had to make such choices given the relative scarcity of options that they had. But for us in the 21st century, we have to take a little bit of a digital literacy approach. We have to be able to captain our way through this maze of options. So media literacy, the ability to understand and critically analyze the influence of mass media and other forms of media. It's important because we want to control our own lives and not be controlled by messages or information that comes from outside. So try to use the three-tiered model of critical thinking to develop media literacy. First of all, so the three-tiered model was experience, interpretation, and analysis. First, be aware of how you experience the media source. Know how much you use it and where you have a tendency to go. Kind of monitor and consider what are your own habits and what is your information diet, basically. Ask yourself who creates these media messages or images and why. What reaction are they trying to establish within me? Is this trying to generate an emotional reaction, some kind of just policy response? Is it trying to make me an advocate for something? Maybe note the message by way of looking at the appearance of the set or any music or graphics that are used to try and shape the viewer's perspective or experience. Sometimes those things can, in a very subtle way, kind of influence the takeaway reaction that you have to some piece of media. Like if you're watching a newscast and then they start to bring in like spooky sounding music while they talk about the story, that's like the cue of the editor's team that they want you to think of this in some kind of dark or mysterious light. And same with like happy or uplifting music and so on. So consider those little elements too. The design of sets, graphics that may be used, and music. Note the amount of time that's devoted to various ads and consider what kind of ads are being advertised during the media broadcast, if it's television or even if it's not. If it's on YouTube, sometimes there are these like sponsored ads. And that's kind of, in a way, sad. We can't really get away from the ads as easily. One thing I like about the internet is usually I can just bypass ads, skip them, open up a different window, but they're increasingly finding ways to try and promote them during your viewing experience. Like I'll be watching YouTube, and then all of a sudden, like in the middle of the video, like right at one of the interesting points, I'm having to watch a commercial unless you buy whatever, YouTube Premium and stuff. So they really want to sell you a product just so that you don't have to watch the ads. I find that funny. Like, I'm going to have to pay you just to not watch commercials. But anyway, the second step, interpretation. Interpret. Make sense of your experiences of media viewership and consumption. What values or points are being expressed by the media outlet that you're looking at? Examine your own reaction to it. Why do you have that reaction? Ask yourself what your reaction to the media says about you, if anything. Do you have any kind of confirmation bias? Is this causing you to tailor your media diet to a particular skewed viewpoint or not? Try to mitigate that bias by taking in news and information from a variety of sources, even sometimes sources that you don't necessarily have a tendency to agree with. At a minimum, it's good to look at them to understand how other people think so that you can at least have a meeting of the minds. That's never a bad thing. And ask other people what they think about the news reports and other media information so you can compare your judgments against theirs. Sometimes it's good to compare notes with people and get out of your own head to see what other people think. Finally, analyze the media messages. See if your analysis is rational. Is it driven by non-rational factors like emotion or greed or anything else? Note any resistance that you have to other interpretations. And identify the purposes of the message. Is it presented through misleading tactics like rhetoric or fallacious appeals or what? So that's all the stuff in Chapter 11, guys, that I told you I wanted to talk about. And the way that I see the lessons on media is that it's a little bit more of a breezy topic for us to discuss. It's very interesting, but it's not like I'm going to be able to say, okay, now here's the definition of modus ponens, or here's the definition of memorable events error. So there's not as many like bullet points, basically, but it's important information and it'll help support your work on the third homework assignment, which I'll give you instructions and deliver to you early next week. So we'll talk about that again on Tuesday. Now, in the syllabus, I had set forth 2 meetings on Chapter 10 and Chapter 11. But as I looked at the chapters and designed the lectures for them, I realized that there's not a ton of content in those 2 chapters to sustain 2 full meetings of 75 minutes each. So in order to kind of break things up and not run out of material for the Tuesday meeting, so we still have some information to go over on Tuesday, I would kind of like to break perhaps a little earlier today than normal so that I can use the remaining time to fill more of the Tuesday meeting on Chapter 10. So that's my plan, if it's okay with you guys, to just sort of maybe let us go now, and then on Tuesday we'll resume. We'll talk about the Chapter 10 advertising and marketing, and then next Thursday I have some videos that I'm just going to share to you guys, and on that day your task is going to be to just watch those videos rather than to have the traditional meeting. Back when we were face-to-face, I would put those videos on in class and we would have one video day where we'd watch them. But since now we're all remote, it's okay for me to just send you the links and have you watch them at your leisure next week. So are we good to go? Let me hear from you. Make sure that everyone's on the same page with this. Is it okay for us to close just a little earlier? That's all by design because I want to have a sort of even margin of time today and on Tuesday. So what do you think? Let me know. If we're good to go, then I'll be able to close the stream and you'll have a little extra time in your morning today. Okay, so thanks so much, Nicole, Ghazi, everybody else. Just making sure we're all okay with this and that it's all clear and understood. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Yoka, Ashley, and everyone else. Appreciate you. Keep coming back to class. Have a good weekend. If you need anything, just email me. I'll be in touch. So until Tuesday, I guess, have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.